Hey everyone, Carlos here with Hypnotherapy Breakthrough. Thanks for tuning in and watching. I am going to continue on the path of talking about developing emotional resilience. So today will be a little bit of a next step. Not that this has to be in any particular order. I'm covering the things that I think are most important to start with, though. So whether you started with the previous video, which was all about um, learning to identify like a secondary gain or purpose behind each of the negative emotions and kind of exploring what that means and how you might look for positive intention behind them. This is to make the emotions themselves seem less adversarial, you know, that you're not having to struggle against them, that there's something you can actually learn from. And today I'm just going to cover another piece that I think is really important, and that is the idea that being able to label your emotions can give you a little bit of control over how you respond and deal with them. Now, a lot of people have feelings that hit them and then they don't have words. They say, I don't know. I don't know what I'm feeling. And no one else is going to know but you. So, if you are really wanting to develop emotional resilience, it's very important that you start to figure out how to put the labels on things. Now, of course, just putting a label on things doesn't solve it. You know, in fact, sometimes putting labels on things can limit you. But I'm specifically working on a different angle right now. So I'm hoping that you'll see that what I'm what I'm aiming for here in this lesson is just uh, use that power, the power to name, to your best advantage. So there's this old magical biblical idea that if you knew the secret name of something or someone, you could have control over it, and that's an interesting and fascinating idea. There are a lot of legends and myths about that. You know, learning the secret name and you had some kind of magical power over it. Well, we know that you know babies don't have a lot of language floating around in their head. Maybe a couple things, but not much. Babies are just sort of seeing things in the world. So as they start to perceive their world and witnessing events and objects, they see shapes and colors and textures and maybe smells and tastes and all sorts of things, temperature. Um, but they don't necessarily have about a bunch of labels. And there's something that happens in the mind when you start to form categories. One thing is that it limits, to some degree, it limits the information flow. And in another sense, it expands your capacity for information. So, in the sense that it limits the information flow, um, there may be things that don't fit into the category you've created that you're now beginning to delete because you've decided that it's unimportant. In other words, you've distorted the importance of things that fit into your list, and therefore you feel like you can delete the things that are not in that list. And of course, you know, you're creating these gross generalizations by doing so. Um, so that's one way that it limits you. But the way that it expands you is that the more capacity for identifying those things, the more effective in the world you can be. So you can start to say, okay, I have an answer for that. Okay, I have a solution for that. Um, Here's the things that I have a solution for. Here are the things that I don't have a solution for. You can start to organize a strategic attack, a strategy. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but right now I'm focusing on the advantage of naming things. Psychologists have discovered that when people are anxious, when they are just able to say what it is that they're anxious about, or even just admitting that they're anxious, that it does affect the way they experience it in a positive way. That it seems like it's a little less problematic than not knowing what you're feeling. So let's just say you had an anxious feeling, but you didn't identify it as anxiety, and it could potentially feel very overwhelming to you, and all you know is that you're uncomfortable and that you're having this panic attack or whatever, but you don't know why, and you may not have even identified it as anxiety yet. take that same situation and suddenly say, hey, you know what you're experiencing is called anxiety. Oh, it is? So then you realize, okay, there's this thing. It's a finite thing. I'm experiencing this quality of life experience called anxiety, and all that panicking and things is related to that. The feeling of overwhelm is related to that. The fact that I'm now examining this, I can ask myself, how am I experiencing this anxiety? So I might say, oh well, I'm picturing the worst possible case. I'm picturing a result that's no good, and then I'm experiencing kinesthetic feelings, visceral feelings of contraction and my heart pounding, and maybe even you know metakinesthetic things like emotions that are moving through me or seem to be moving through me. And I've got a whole story that starts playing for me. So you see, the label itself, once you give it a label, gives you some sense of being able to manipulate the idea in your head. You can start to talk about um, what it is specifically that's triggering you. And maybe you can start to begin examining whether or not it even makes sense. Like, um, you begin to see where you're contributing to the problem by adding a story or defining it in ways that maybe aren't inherent. They're not necessarily true, they're just the way you've taken it. So once you label them like that, it's the beginning of being able to analyze it. And sometimes analysis can be helpful, particularly when your emotions have gotten the better of you. So for today's lesson, I want you to focus in on the ability to label your feelings, the ability to say, um, maybe start off with a really gross category. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Well, what the hell does uncomfortable mean? Specifically, how are you uncomfortable? In what way are you uncomfortable? Is this causing you to do something you don't want to do, or is it preventing you from doing something that you really feel that you ought to be doing? So, how is it affecting you? So, this is in NLP when we talk about exploring the boundary conditions. It's when we look at the problem from within the problem state. So we allow ourselves to feel the problem. We allow ourselves to acknowledge that it's there, and we start to ask the question of where is this affecting us? How is it affecting us? When is it affecting us? And when isn't it? Where isn't it? What isn't it affecting? That's saying that there's a problem and there's a not problem, right? The not problem is everything that's not the problem. And of course, the problem is everything from within the problem state. So we explore these boundary conditions. They're conditions that we place upon what we think the problem is. And once you understand that, you're getting valuable information that might allow you to come up with a strategy to fix it, to change it, to adapt to it, to transform it. Okay? So identify the emotion, start broad, and work your way towards a more finite definition. So as I said, you might start with, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Well, uncomfortable in what way? What other words give you more of a specific labeling of what's happening? Get down to the nitty gritty if you can. Question yourself and question your answers in such a way that you ask yourself, did that answer give a precise set of clues about what's happening, or was it more generalized? It's okay to start generalized, but you're not doing yourself any favors by keeping it generalized usually. The more specific you are, the more you can understand how you're thinking about it. Because those specifics are where your mind has turned the laser focus of your mind um, into the details and the nitty gritty of it. So when you understand that, it's much easier then to learn more about what your subconscious strategy is for how you form that problem in the first place. All right, and the more you understand that subconscious strategy, because you're making it conscious again by discovering it, the easier it is for you to come up with a solution. So label your emotions, get specific. If you say overwhelm, well, here's a clue for you. Overwhelm typically means that the size of information chunks that you're handling are huge. Instead of finite ideas, you've got a very generalized idea. So you're saying, um, "Hey, Carlos, what's the problem?" And Carlos is saying, "Everything. It's all a problem. My whole life." Right? That's a huge chunk of information. Now, I'm not specific enough. I'm not saying, well, I'm having trouble at work, specifically with my boss who's just giving me a hard time, and I'm trying my best, and then my coworkers are not really being good team members, and then I came home and I'm having a fight with my wife or my girlfriend or whatever, and I feel like she doesn't understand. And okay, well, now I'm being specific, aren't I? It's a lot less overwhelming when I go from a broad, general, large chunk of information down to a smaller, more finite, defined chunk, specific chunk of information. It doesn't seem as big or as overwhelming when you chunk down to a specific. So, this is the power that you hold by being able to label your emotions. When you do this, and you've done it to uh, the capacity that you can, in other words, you can't really chunk down any further, you can't get more specific, then you might begin to ask yourself a very interesting question. And that is, how is this terrible, negative, uncomfortable thing actually good? Like, in what scenario might this be a good thing? So it's similar to what you were asking in the previous video, but there's a little bit of a difference there. It's kind of like saying, what's great about this crazy, difficult thing that just happened? And what's this going to do? This is going to cause your mind to reframe and to find a solution. It's going to help you to see what are different ways that you could look at this very same thing and get benefit from it. It's going to, in a sense, draw out your positivity. It's going to draw out your solution focus so that you can look for what's good in the situation. What's the silver lining, if you will, in this gray, dark cloud? Okay. I could go on, but I'm not going to. It's a little over 12 and a half minutes now. I'm going to stop this video. Let me know how it goes. Do the exploration. Feel free to leave comments and questions about it. This is your next piece on developing peace within yourself through emotional resilience. And I hope that you got something good out of this. And please feel free to share with others. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you again next time. Take care.